You know what's funny about kindness? It shows up exactly when you think you've got nothing left to give. Jack woke up that morning wearing a tie for the first time in months. Not because he wanted to, because he had to. The contract meeting was supposed to save everything. His construction company, his promise to Tu Tien, the future he kept saying was just around the corner. He stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the knot at his throat, and for a second he looked like the director he used to be. Tu Tien saw it too. She smiled at him from across the room, that gentle smile that always made him feel like maybe things would be okay. "You look handsome," she said. "You always say that." Because it's always true. But they both knew what the tie really meant. It meant desperation dressed up as professionalism. It meant 2 months without a single project. It meant selling land just to keep the lights on. Tu Tien was heading out too, basket in hand, ready to harvest chilies from a farmer's field she'd arranged to work. She'd been doing this for weeks now, waking up early, walking the long path through the rice fields, selling vegetables at the market for 10,000 dong per kilo. It wasn't much, but it was something, and something was better than the nothing Jack's company had been bringing in since Tet. "I'll give you a ride," Jack offered. "No," she shook her head. "You need to focus on your meeting. I'll take the shortcut through the fields." They stood there for a moment, two people trying to hold each other up while barely standing themselves. "We'll get through this," Jack said. "I know," Tu Tien replied. "Together." He believed her, or maybe he just needed to. Here's what Jack didn't know. That contract meeting was already over before it started. He sat in the cafe with Phuc, his assistant, going over documents for the third time. Everything was perfect. The terms were clear. The timeline was realistic. This project could restart the entire company, hire back the workers they'd let go, pay off the debts piling up, give Tu Tien a life where she didn't have to sell vegetables just to help him survive. The client was late. 10 minutes. 20. Phuc kept calling. No answer. "Maybe traffic," Phuc said, though his voice didn't sound convinced. Jack nodded. He'd learned not to panic at the first sign of trouble. You wait. You stay calm. You don't let them see you sweat. 40 minutes. Still nothing. Then the phone rang. Not the client. The client's secretary. "I'm very sorry, but the director can't make it today. He's busy. We'll reschedule." That was it. No explanation, no apology. Just busy. Phuc looked at Jack, waiting for a reaction, anger, frustration, something, but Jack just closed the folder, took a sip of his watermelon juice, told Phuc to head to the construction site. "And the contract?" Phuc asked. "We'll figure it out." But here's the thing. Nobody saw coming. After Phuc left, Jack didn't go straight home. He sat there alone, staring at that closed folder, and he made a phone call. Not to another client, not to his mother, to the real estate agent. "Have you found a buyer for my land yet?" "The house plot would sell faster than the farm," the agent said. If Jack was ready to let it go, Jack was ready. What choice did he have? He was walking out of the cafe, phone still in his hand, contract folder under his arm, when someone called his name. An old man, weathered face, kind eyes. It took Jack a second to recognize him. Mr. Phuong. Tu Tien had mentioned him, a man who'd helped them before, back when things were different. Back when Jack still had something to offer. "Jack, come, sit. Let me buy you a drink." Jack wanted to say no. He wanted to go home, close the door, and figure out how to tell Tu Tien that the miracle they'd been waiting for wasn't coming. But Mr. Phuong's face held something Jack hadn't seen in a while. Warmth. No judgment, no pity, just humanity. So he sat. "I heard things have been difficult," Mr. Phuong said, sliding a cold soda across the table. Jack didn't ask how he knew. Small towns talk, especially when someone's falling. "I'm managing," Jack said. Mr. Fwong smiled. Not the kind of smile that says, "I don't believe you." The kind that says, "I've been there too." "When I was in trouble, you helped me," Mr. Fwong said. "I went back to my hometown, sold some land. Now I'm back, and I want to buy a small plot here, build a house, settle down for good." Jack listened, and slowly something shifted. This wasn't a business conversation. This was two men who'd both been broken by life, sitting across from each other, choosing not to stay broken. "I'll help you find land," Jack said. "Good land. Fair price." "I knew you would." They talked for a while about Mrs. Tui. Mr. Fwong had finally left her. About Tien, not his biological son after all. About starting over when you're too old to start over. And then Mr. Fwong said something that stuck. "You're selling your land, aren't you?" Jack nodded. "Things will get better, Jack. You're a good man. Good men don't stay down forever." Jack wanted to believe that, but belief is hard when the bank account says otherwise. Meanwhile, across town, Tu Tien sat at the market. Her basket of chilies was half empty, a good sign. Each sale, no matter how small, felt like proof. Proof she could contribute. Proof she wasn't just the girl Jack had to protect. She was a partner, a fighter. "How much?" an old woman asked, pointing at the peppers. 10,000 dong per kilo, ma'am." "I'll take half." Tu Tien's hands moved quickly, measuring, bagging, smiling. This was her life now, and she didn't hate it. There was something honest about dirt under your nails and sweat on your back. Something real. Her phone buzzed. "Jack." "I'm done at the shop," she said. "Coming home soon." "I'll pick you up." She could hear something in his voice. Not quite sadness. Not quite defeat. Something quieter. Something tired. "Did the meeting go well?" A pause. "We'll talk when I see you." That's when Tu Tien knew. The contract had fallen through. She hung up, packed her things, counted the money in her small pouch. Barely enough for groceries, but it was hers. She'd earned it. Jack would be devastated. She knew that. But she also knew something else. They'd survive this. They had to. Because giving up wasn't an option. She walked toward the road where Jack said he'd meet her empty basket swinging at her side. And that's when she saw it. A figure, lying on the side of the road, not moving. At first, Tu Tien thought maybe someone was resting. The heat could do that, make you need to lie down, just for a moment. But as she got closer, her stomach dropped. It was a woman, young, pregnant, her face pale, her breathing shallow. Tu Tien dropped her basket. Miss, can you hear me?" No response. And just like that, everything changed. Here's what you need to understand about moments like this. They don't ask permission. They don't wait until you're ready. They just arrive. And suddenly, everything you thought mattered 5 minutes ago becomes background noise. Tu Tien knelt beside the woman, her hands shaking. The woman's skin was cold despite the heat. Her lips were cracked. Her dress, thin, worn, clung to her swollen belly. 7 months pregnant, maybe 8, and completely unconscious. "Miss, please wake up," Tu Tien whispered, gently touching her shoulder. Nothing. Tu Tien's mind raced. She wasn't a nurse. She didn't know what to do. But she knew what not to do. Leave someone dying on the side of the road. She fumbled for her phone, hands trembling so badly she almost dropped it. Jack, I need you. Right now." "What's wrong?" "There's a woman. She's pregnant. I don't know what's wrong with her. Please hurry. She could hear him moving already, keys jingling, engine starting. Where are you? The main road, near the market entrance. Jack, please. I'm coming. Stay with her. Tu Tien hung up and looked down at the woman again. This close, she could see things she'd missed before. The woman's feet were bare, covered in cuts and dirt. Her hands were thin, almost skeletal. This wasn't someone who'd just fainted from the heat. This was someone who'd been walking for a long time, running from something, or searching for something. And then the woman's eyes opened, just barely, just enough to see Tu Tien's face hovering above her. Help! The word came out like a breath. Please, my baby. I'm here, Tu Tien said, gripping the woman's hand. Help is coming. Just hold on. The woman's eyes closed again. Tu Tien had never felt more helpless in her life. All those weeks of selling vegetables, of learning to be strong, of proving she could contribute, none of it prepared her for this, for holding a stranger's hand and praying that breath keeps coming. She heard the motorbike before she saw it. Jack skidded to a stop, nearly dropping the bike in his rush to get to them. How long has she been like this? He asked, kneeling beside Tu Tien. I don't know. I just found her. Jack checked the woman's pulse. Weak, but there. He looked at Tu Tien, and in his eyes, she saw the same calculation she was making. Hospital was 20 minutes away, maybe longer in traffic. The woman might not have 20 minutes. We take her ourselves, Jack said. Now. He didn't wait for Tu Tien to agree. He was already lifting the woman, carefully, like she might break, settling her in front of him on the bike. Tu Tien climbed on behind, wrapping her arms around both of them, trying to keep the woman steady. Hold her tight, Jack said. Don't let her fall. And then they were moving. The road blurred. Jack drove faster than Tu Tien had ever seen him drive, weaving through traffic, ignoring every rule he usually followed. The woman's head lolled against his chest. Tu Tien kept one hand pressed against the woman's back, feeling for breathing, for heartbeat, for any sign that they weren't too late. Stay with us, Tu Tien whispered into the wind. Please stay with us. The hospital entrance appeared like a miracle. Jack didn't even bother parking properly, just pulled up to the emergency doors and started shouting for help. Nurses came running, a stretcher appeared. Hands that knew what to do took over. When did she lose consciousness? A doctor asked. I don't know, Tu Tien said. I found her on the road. Do you know her name? Any medical history? No, nothing. We saw her and... The doctor nodded. He'd seen this before. People helping strangers. People doing the right thing even when it complicated their lives. You did good, he said. We'll take it from here. And just like that, the woman disappeared behind swinging doors. Tu Tien and Jack stood there in the harsh fluorescent light of the emergency room, both breathing hard, both trying to process what had just happened. Jack's tie was crooked. His shirt was damp with sweat. The contract folder he'd been carrying was gone, probably fell somewhere between the cafe and here. He looked at Tu Tien. Are you okay? He asked. She nodded, then shook her head, then started crying. Not sad crying, not scared crying, just release. All the tension of finding that woman, of not knowing if they'd make it in time, of holding someone's life in your hands and hoping you don't drop it. Jack pulled her close, let her cry into his shoulder, didn't say anything, because what was there to say? They stayed like that until a nurse approached. The patient is stable, she said. Dehydration, malnutrition, exhaustion. We're running tests, but the baby seems okay for now. Thank God, Tu Tien breathed. Does she have family we can contact? The nurse asked. Tu Tien and Jack looked at each other. They didn't even know her name. "We don't know," Jack said. "We just found her." The nurse nodded, making a note on her clipboard. "Well, when she wakes up, she'll want to thank you. What you did, bringing her here, you probably saved 2 lives today." After she left, Jack and Tu Tien sat down in the waiting room. The plastic chairs were uncomfortable. The fluorescent lights were too bright. But neither of them suggested leaving. "The contract fell through," Jack said finally. "I know. I'm selling the house plot." "I know that too." He looked at her. "You're not angry?" "At you? No." She took his hand. "We'll figure it out. We always do." "I keep failing you." "Jack." She squeezed his fingers. "You just helped save a pregnant woman's life, the same day you lost everything. You didn't think about the cost. You didn't calculate whether you could afford it. You just did it. That's not failing. That's being exactly who I need you to be." He didn't cry. Jack never cried. But his eyes got that shine that means tears are close. "What if this doesn't get better?" he asked quietly. "What if I can't fix it?" "Then we'll be broken together," Tu Tien said, "and we'll still be okay." An hour passed, then 2. The woman still hadn't woken up. Jack made phone calls, checking on Phuc, talking to the real estate agent, handling all the things that kept falling even when you needed a break. Tu Tien sat quietly, watching people come and go. A mother with a sick child, an old man with a cough, a teenager with a broken arm, each one carrying their own emergency, their own crisis. And somehow, the world kept spinning. She thought about the woman behind those doors, pregnant, alone, collapsed on the side of a road. What kind of story led to that? What kind of pain? What kind of desperation? And she thought about the timing. How, if she'd left the market 5 minutes earlier or 5 minutes later, she might have missed her? How, if Jack hadn't answered his phone, hadn't come immediately, hadn't driven like a madman to get here? Things might have ended differently. It felt like something more than coincidence. Like the universe lining up pieces on a board, waiting to see what people would do when the moment arrived. Jack came back, phone in his pocket, exhaustion written across his face. "Mr. Phuong called," he said. "Asked if I found any land for him yet." "What did you tell him?" "That I'd look tomorrow." He sat down beside her. One crisis at a time. Tu Tien leaned her head on his shoulder. They sat like that, 2 people who'd started the day trying to save their own lives and ended it saving someone else's. "Jack? Yeah? I'm proud of us." He didn't answer, just kissed the top of her head. Outside, the sun was setting. Inside, behind those swinging doors, a woman and her baby were fighting to survive. And in the waiting room, 2 people who had nothing left to give had given anyway. Sometimes that's all kindness is, showing up when you're empty, helping when you can't afford to, choosing someone else's crisis over your own. The nurse came back one more time before visiting hours ended. "She's asking for you," she said. "You know what changes everything? Eye contact with someone you just saved." The woman was awake. Barely. Her eyes were half open, clouded with exhaustion. But they were searching, looking for the faces she'd heard in her half-conscious state. When Tu Tien and Jack walked into the room, those eyes found them and filled with something that looked like relief, mixed with disbelief. "You..." Her voice was hoarse. "You're real. I thought I dreamed you." Tu Tien moved closer, pulling a chair beside the bed. "How are you feeling?" "Alive." A weak smile. "Because of you." The woman's name was Lan. 24 years old, 8 months pregnant. She'd been walking for 3 days straight, sleeping in bus stations when she could, skipping meals to save money for... She didn't say what. Just that she needed to get away. that going back wasn't an option. "Do you have family?" Jack asked gently. "Someone we can call?" Lan's hand moved instinctively to her belly. "Just us now. Me and the baby." Tu Tien understood that answer, the kind that said everything by saying almost nothing. No family meant either they were gone or they'd chosen to be gone. Either way, Lan was alone. "The doctor said you need to stay here," Tu Tien said. "At least a few days. For the baby." "I can't afford—" Lan's voice cracked. "I don't have money for this." Jack and Tu Tien looked at each other. They'd both been thinking the same thing since the nurse mentioned hospital bills. They barely had enough to cover their own survival. Jack was literally selling land to stay afloat. Tu Tien was selling vegetables for pocket change. But here's the thing about being broken yourself. You recognize it in others. And sometimes that recognition matters more than logic. "Don't worry about money right now," Jack said. "Focus on getting better." "I can't let you. You're not letting us do anything," Tu Tien interrupted softly. "We're choosing to. There's a difference." Lan's eyes filled with tears. Not sad tears, grateful ones. The kind that come when you've been expecting the world to kick you again, and instead, it offers a hand. They stayed until the nurses made them leave. Walked out into the parking lot where Jack's motorbike sat under a flickering streetlight. Neither of them spoke for a moment. "We can't afford this," Jack said finally. Not angry, just stating facts. "I know. The hospital bills alone." "I know, Jack." He ran his hands through his hair. "Then why does it feel like the right thing to do?" Tu Tien smiled. "Because it is." They rode home slowly this time. No emergency, no rushing. Just two people trying to figure out how to help someone when they could barely help themselves. The farmhouse was dark when they arrived. Jack had forgotten to leave the porch light on. They stumbled inside, both too tired to bother with dinner. Tu Tien collapsed on the couch. Jack sat beside her. "What are we doing?" he asked at the darkness. "Something good," Tu Tien answered. "Maybe something stupid, but definitely something good." The next morning came too early. Jack woke up to 3 missed calls from the real estate agent. The house plot had a buyer. They wanted to close quickly. Jack stared at his phone, at that message that meant giving up another piece of the life he'd built, and felt nothing. Not sadness, not relief, just numb acceptance. He called back. "Tell them yes." Tu Tien found him sitting at the kitchen table, coffee untouched in front of him. "You sold it," she said, not a question. "Had to." She sat down across from him. "What if we used some of that money to help Lan, just until she gets back on her feet?" Jack looked at her. "Are you serious?" "Completely." "Tu Tien, we need that money. For us. For the company. For what?" she interrupted. Another failed contract meeting? Another month of barely surviving? She reached across the table, taking his hands. "Jack, when was the last time we did something that felt right? Not smart, not practical, just right?" He didn't have an answer. "We found her for a reason," Tu Tien continued. "On the same day you lost everything, on the same day, I was selling vegetables just to feel useful. That woman showed up in our lives exactly when we thought we had nothing left to give. You don't think that means something? I think it means we're about to make another mistake. Maybe," Tu Tien smiled, "but it'll be our mistake. Together." They went to the hospital that afternoon, brought fruit they couldn't afford and flowers from Tu Tien's garden. Lan was sitting up now, colour returning to her face, one hand resting on her belly where the baby was kicking. "You came back," she said, and the surprise in her voice broke Tu Tien's heart a little. "Of course we did," Tu Tien said, setting the flowers on the bedside table. Jack pulled up 2 chairs. "We wanted to talk to you about something." Lan tensed. People only used that tone when they were about to take back a kindness. "When you're released," Jack continued, "you'll need somewhere to stay, somewhere safe, for you and the baby." "I'll figure something out. We have a farmhouse," Tu Tien said. "It's small, nothing fancy, but there's a spare room, and it's quiet, peaceful. Good place for a baby." Lan stared at them. "You're offering me your home?" "Just temporarily," Jack said, "until you get on your feet, find work, figure out your next step." "I can't," Lan's voice broke. "You don't even know me. Why would you—" "Because someone helped me once," Jack said quietly. "When I had nothing, when everyone else walked away. One person stayed, and that changed everything." He looked at Tu Tien. "And because she's teaching me that sometimes the right thing is also the crazy thing." Lan covered her face with her hands and cried. Deep, shaking sobs that sounded like years of holding everything together finally breaking loose. Tu Tien moved to the bed, pulling her into a hug, letting her cry it out. "You don't have to decide now," Tu Tien murmured. "Just think about it. You're not alone anymore. Remember that." When they left, Jack was quiet. They walked to the parking lot, got on the bike, and sat there without starting the engine. "We just invited a stranger to live with us," he said. "Yep. We have no money. Nope. This is possibly the worst decision we've ever made." Tu Tien wrapped her arms around his waist, resting her cheek against his back. "Or the best. We won't know until we try." Jack started the engine. As they pulled out of the hospital parking lot, he felt something shift inside him. Not hope exactly, not quite peace, but something close. Something that felt like purpose. The house money would come through in a week. The company was still hemorrhaging debt. The contract that was supposed to save everything was still gone. Nothing about their practical situation had improved. But riding home with Tu Tien's arms around him, knowing they'd chosen kindness over caution, Jack felt richer than he had in months. Maybe Mr. Phuong was right. Maybe good men don't stay down forever. Maybe the universe keeps track of who helps when it costs them everything. Or maybe none of that mattered. Maybe all that mattered was the choice itself. To see someone drowning and dive in anyway, even when you're barely floating yourself. The farmhouse came into view. Small, humble, about to get a lot more crowded. Jack pulled into the driveway and cut the engine. "You ready for this?" he asked Tu Tien. She climbed off the bike, looking at their little home with new eyes. "Ready as I'll ever be." Inside, they started preparing the spare room, cleaning, organizing, making space for a life they didn't know yet, but had chosen to protect anyway. And somewhere across town, in a hospital bed, a young pregnant woman touched her belly and whispered to the baby growing inside, "We're going to be okay. I don't know how yet, but we're going to be okay." Sometimes salvation doesn't look like what you expect. Sometimes it looks like two broke people on a motorbike. Sometimes it shows up exactly when you've stopped looking for it. The sun set on a day that started with loss and ended with gain. Not the kind you can count. Not the kind that shows up on a bank statement. The kind that shows up in how you sleep at night. In knowing that when the moment came, you didn't look away. Jack and Tu Tien stood in the doorway of the spare room, looking at the bed they'd just made. And for the first time in months, they both felt something dangerous. They felt hope.